The morning Marcus Webb pulled into the Pinnacle Tower parking garage in his rusted, smoke-coughing 1967 Ford Mustang, the entire world seemed to pause and stare. The car groaned like an old man climbing stairs, a deep tubercular rattle that bounced off concrete pillars and drew heads from every direction. Paint that had once been a proud candy, apple red, had faded and bubbled into something closer to rust-streaked salmon. The rear quarter panel held together by a combination of Hope, J.B. Weld, and a single self-tapping screw. Marcus had borrowed from his daughter's science project kit. The front bumper sat at a slight leftward tilt, like a drunk trying to look casual. One headlight housing was cracked. The vinyl roof was peeling at the rear corner, curling back like a sunburned lip. But Marcus drove it with the quiet dignity of a man who had earned every inch of the road beneath him. He was 38 years old, compact and broad-shouldered, with hands that were always slightly rough, no matter how much lotion he used. The hands of someone who fixed things himself, because no one else was going to. His gray slacks were pressed with military precision. His white shirt was crisp. His shoes, black leather Oxfords, were polished to a near-mirror shine. The contrast between the man and the machine he climbed out of was the kind of thing that made people do a double take. He grabbed his laptop bag from the back seat, checked that the door actually latched properly on the second try, and walked toward the elevator with his head held steady and his jaw set in that particular way that said, "I know exactly what I look like, and I don't owe you a comment on it." Marcus Webb was a senior data architect at Meridian Analytics, a firm that had recently been acquired by the Callaway Group, a conglomerate headed by one Derek Callaway, age 44, net worth estimated at somewhere between obscene and incomprehensible, and temperament firmly settled in the range between tempestuous and theatrical. Derek Callaway had built his fortune on real estate and tech acquisitions, and he wore that fortune the way some men wear cologne, aggressively and in every room. He collected things, properties, companies, Patek Philippe watches, opinions. He had strong ones about weakness, about failure, about the kind of men who drove broken cars to buildings he owned. The encounter happened at 8:47 a.m. in the east wing of the parking garage, witnessed by no fewer than 11 people, a fact that would matter later. Callaway had arrived in his matte black Bentley Continental GT, sliding out with the fluid ease of a man whose mornings involved a personal trainer, a chef-prepared smoothie, and the absolute certainty that the universe was correctly organized. He was flanked by two assistants and walking toward the private elevator when Marcus's Mustang coughed one final, theatrical plume of blue-gray smoke as the engine died. Callaway stopped. He looked at the car. He looked at Marcus. And then, with the easy cruelty of a man who has never had to worry about consequences, he smiled. "Is that thing street legal?" Callaway called out, loud enough to carry, his voice the kind of polished baritone that came from years of conference rooms and TED-adjacent stages. "Or did you drive it off a demolition derby set?" One of his assistants laughed, the quick, obligatory laugh of a person protecting their employment. Marcus turned slowly. He looked at Callaway with an expression that was completely, terrifyingly calm. "It runs," Marcus said simply. Callaway tilted his head, smiling wider now, performing for the audience that had materialized in the way audiences always do when someone with power decides to perform cruelty in public. "Barely," Callaway said. "You know, Webb, I've seen the numbers you run for us. Sharp work, smart guy. Might want to invest in yourself a little." He gestured vaguely at the car. "This thing is an embarrassment." He walked on. His assistants followed. Marcus stood still for a moment that lasted exactly 4 seconds. 4 seconds that 11 people would later describe in very different ways, though they all agreed on one thing. Marcus Webb did not flinch. What Derek Callaway did not know, what none of them knew, standing in that garage with their coffee cups and their quiet, relieved laughter, was the story of the car. Not the rust, not the engine smoke, the actual story, which began with a man named Raymond Webb, Marcus's father, who had saved for 14 months in 1987 to buy that Mustang used from a dealership in Beaumont, Texas. Raymond was a mechanic and a dreamer, which in his world were almost the same thing, and he had loved that car the way certain men love things they built, or saved or fought for, with a reverence that went past logic into something closer to sacred. Raymond Webb died when Marcus was 12, of a heart attack that came without warning on a Tuesday morning in March, leaving behind a wife, 2 kids, a modest house with a cracked foundation, and one 1967 Mustang that Marcus's mother Gloria refused to sell. "That's your daddy's hands in that car," she told Marcus once, while he stood in the driveway just staring at it. "Every bolt he touched, every hour he put in, you don't sell your daddy's hands." Marcus had grown up around that car. He'd learned to check the oil in it. He'd learned to change a tire on it. When he was 16, Raymond's older brother, Uncle Cleo, a man who smelled permanently of motor oil and menthol cigarettes, had started teaching Marcus the deeper work: carburetor, timing chain, the particular language of a V8 engine, spoken through sound and feel, and the color of exhaust. The Mustang had become the place where Marcus processed the specific grief of growing up without a father. Patiently, methodically, with his hands occupied and his mind half somewhere else. The car had broken down completely when Marcus was 26. During the worst year of his life. The year his wife Elena was diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer. The year their daughter Lily was born 7 weeks early and spent her first month in the NICU. The year Marcus worked 3 jobs simultaneously and slept in 4-hour increments on a hospital recliner. The Mustang had sat in a storage unit he paid $40 a month for under a canvas tarp, while the rest of his life demanded every resource he had. Elena died 18 months after Lily was born. She was 29 years old. She had held Lily once, fully, not through NICU glass, but held her, skin to skin, for 40 minutes on Sunday afternoon, when Lily was strong enough and Elena was not yet gone. Marcus had a photograph of that moment on his phone, backed up in 3 places, that he had never shown anyone. So when Marcus walked to his desk that morning after Calloway's performance in the garage, he was not thinking about embarrassment. He was thinking about his daughter, who was now 7 years old, and had recently decided that her favorite color was the color of her grandfather's car. "That rusty gold red," she'd said, with the absolute authority of a 7-year-old identifying beauty. He was thinking about the upcoming weekend, when he and Lily had planned to spend Saturday morning in the driveway together. Lily handing him tools with the seriousness of a surgical nurse, both of them working on the Mustang, the way Marcus had once worked on it with Uncle Cleo. He was thinking about a promise he had made to himself, that by the time Lily was old enough to drive, that car would be exactly what it was supposed to be, not to impress anyone, not to prove a point, but because Raymond Webb's hands were in that car, and those hands deserved better than a storage unit and a canvas tarp. He opened his laptop. He pulled up a spreadsheet. He went to work, but somewhere in the back of his mind a clock had started. Not a clock of anger. Marcus had long since learned to be suspicious of decisions made from anger. A clock of intention, of purpose. He had a plan that had been forming for 3 years, building slowly and carefully the way good plans do. The way a man who has learned to be patient, because patience was not optional, builds anything. Brick by brick, dollar by dollar, hour by hour. Calloway's mockery had not created the plan. But it had, without question, accelerated the timeline. Marcus Webb pulled up a contact in his phone, a man named Desmond Trice, who ran the best restoration shop in the state, and sent a single text message. "I'm ready," it said. "Let's do this right." Desmond Trice was 61 years old, built like a man who had spent 4 decades wrestling engines into submission, with forearms that looked architectural, and a voice like gravel poured slowly into a steel drum. He had restored cars for collectors, for museums, for a former governor, who had then lost an election and sold the car anyway, and for exactly 3 people he considered friends, one of whom was now Marcus Webb. They had met 8 years ago at a regional car show, bonded over a shared reverence for early Mustang fastbacks, and maintained the kind of friendship that didn't require frequency to stay warm. Desmond ran Trice Restorations out of a 6-square-foot shop in a warehouse district on the south side of the city, a place that smelled of lacquer thinner and ambition, and always had 3 or 4 cars in various states of transformation, sitting on lifts and rotisseries, like elaborate mechanical surgery. When Marcus arrived at the shop on Saturday morning with Lily beside him, she was wearing her favorite red jacket and carrying a small notebook. She used to write down important car facts. Desmond came out to meet them in the parking lot and stood quietly for a moment, in front of the Mustang. He walked around it once. He crouched to look at the rocker panels. He opened the hood and spent 3 minutes studying the engine bay with a flashlight, making small sounds of assessment that weren't quite words. Lily watched him with enormous eyes, her notebook open and her pencil ready. "It's Grandpa Raymond's car," she told Desmond, with the gravity of someone making an official declaration. Desmond looked at her. "I know it is," he said, "and we're going to treat it like it." What followed was the most focused 30 days of Marcus Webb's recent life, and also some of the most expensive. Though Marcus had been saving for this specific purpose for 3 years, a separate account he called the Raymond Fund, built from overtime pay and tax returns, and the money he had declined to spend on himself in the quiet, accumulating way of a man with a long-term goal. The scope of the restoration was complete and uncompromising. The body went first, every panel stripped to bare metal, the rust cut out with surgical precision, new steel welded in by Desmond's best fabricator, a 26-year-old named Corinne, who had grown up in her grandmother's body shop and had hands steadier than most surgeons. The rear quarter panels were replaced entirely. The floor pans, which had developed rust-through spots over decades, were replaced with exact reproductions. The frame was media blasted, inspected for cracks, reinforced at 2 points, and coated with a chassis sealer that would outlast everyone in the building. The engine rebuild was where Marcus spent the most time, because this was the part that mattered most to him. On a level that was not about performance or dollar value, but about something harder to name. The original 390 FE big block was disassembled completely on an engine stand, while Lily watched from a safe distance, drawing pictures of the parts in her notebook. Every component was measured, inspected, and evaluated. What could be saved was rebuilt, what couldn't was replaced with period-correct parts sourced from suppliers Desmond had been working with for 30 years. The crankshaft was reground. New bearings throughout, new pistons, new rings, new gaskets. The cylinder heads were sent to a machine shop for a full rebuild. New valve seats, new guides, new springs. Marcus was there, or for most of it in the shop on evenings and Saturday mornings, learning what he didn't already know and doing the work he did, alongside Desmond and Corinne, and a third man named Felix, who handled the electrical system with the methodical patience of a man diffusing something precious. The interior came apart like a time capsule. The original pony interior, cracked and faded but structurally present. The bench seat wearing the specific topography of decades of occupants. Marcus had sourced a complete reproduction interior kit in parchment, the original color, from a Mustang specialist in Georgia, and Desmond's upholstery contact, a woman named Sandra, who worked out of a separate shop 2 blocks away, spent 4 days on the front and rear seats alone, hand-stitching the detail work with a care that was, as she put it, not about the money, because this is clearly about something else. New carpet, color-matched and cut to pattern. New door panels, new headliner, new dash pad, because the original had cracked along the top in a pattern that looked like a dry riverbed. The gauges were sent out for restoration, and returned looking like they had just come off an assembly line. Every piece of chrome trim was either replated or replaced. The steering wheel, a 3-spoke Mustang original, was preserved and cleaned to a warmth that no reproduction could replicate. Because Marcus refused to replace it, his father's hands had worn it to exactly that patina, and that was not something you threw away. The paint decision took 2 weeks of quiet deliberation between Marcus and Desmond, conducted in the evenings over coffee at Desmond's shop, with Lily sometimes asleep on a folded moving blanket in the corner while they talked. The original color, candy apple red, a 1967 Ford factory color designated as Code T, was the obvious choice and the only real one, but the question was about the specific quality of the final result. Desmond had a relationship with a painter named Augusto, who had spent 15 years doing custom work for high-end restoration shops across 3 states before semi-retiring to his own small operation in the same warehouse district, taking only 4 or 5 jobs a year, each one selected on the basis of whether it interested him. Desmond called in a favor. Augusto came to look at the car. He was a quiet man in his mid-50s, who wore paint-spattered canvas pants and spoke slowly, and with absolute precision. He walked around the stripped shell of the Mustang, now in epoxy primer, and said almost nothing for 10 minutes. Then he crouched down and looked at the contour of the rear quarter panel, where Corinne's new steel had been welded and shaped. He ran his fingertips along it. "Good work," he said to no one in particular. Then he stood up and looked at Marcus. "Tell me about the car," he said, "not the specs, the car." And Marcus told him, Raymond Webb, Beaumont, Texas, 1987, 14 months of saving, a Tuesday in March, a 12-year-old boy in a driveway. a canvas tarp for 11 years, a little girl who had decided rusty gold red was her favorite color. Augusto listened without interrupting. When Marcus finished, Augusto was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'll do it. And I'm going to do it so that 40 years from now someone looks at that paint and knows it was done by someone who understood what they were painting." It took Augusto 9 days. The process began with a blocking and leveling sequence. The entire body surface sanded through multiple grits until it was geometrically perfect, every minor imperfection in the bodywork identified and corrected before a single drop of color was applied. The base was a catalyzed epoxy primer sealer. The color itself was mixed to match the original 1967 Ford Candy Apple Red formula, but Augusto, with Marcus's explicit blessing, added depth through a process of multiple translucent base coats that gave the final color a luminosity that the original factory process, constrained by production speed, had never quite achieved. The clear coat was a high solid formula, applied in 5 coats, each wet sanded between applications, resulting in a depth of gloss that made the car's surface look less like paint and more like something you could reach into. When Augusto removed the masking and rolled the car into the sunlight outside the shop, Lily, who had been waiting in Marcus's car with a book, got out, walked toward the Mustang, and stopped about 6 feet away. She stood very still. Then she turned to her father and said, with complete seriousness, "Daddy, it looks like a fire." The reveal was not planned as a public event. Marcus had not orchestrated a spectacle. He had simply, on a Monday morning 31 days after the incident in the parking garage, driven the finished Mustang to work. That was all. He drove it through the city at dawn, windows down, the rebuilt 390, producing a sound that was not loud but was enormous. A deep, authoritative pulse that seemed to come from somewhere below the frequency of ordinary sound, something you felt in your sternum before you heard it with your ears. People at bus stops turned their heads. A cyclist stopped pedaling and coasted, turning to watch it pass. At a red light, a man in a pickup truck rolled down his window and said, "Brother, what year is that?" And Marcus said, "67. And the man shook his head slowly in the specific way that means there are no words adequate to this situation. He pulled into the Pinnacle Tower parking garage at 8:51 a.m. The Mustang's exhaust note echoed off the concrete in a way that was impossible to ignore, that deep, loping idle, filling the space like a low chord held on a cathedral organ. People appeared. They did not rush. They drifted the way people drift towards something they feel before they understand it. By the time Marcus parked and stepped out, same gray slacks, same white shirt, same polished Oxfords. There were 14 people within viewing distance of the car, most of them standing with coffee cups arrested halfway to their mouths. The candy apple red in the fluorescent and daylight mix of the garage entrance was almost violent in its beauty. The chrome, bumpers, trim, Mustang emblems, caught and scattered light like something alive. The interior, visible through the rolled-down driver's window, was a study in period-perfect perfection. Derek Calloway arrived at 9:03 a.m. He stepped out of the Bentley and was immediately aware that something in the garage's social atmosphere was different. A cluster of people, a low murmur of conversation, an energy that was not ordinary Monday morning energy. He walked toward it with the mild curiosity of a man accustomed to being the most interesting thing in any room. He saw the car before he saw Marcus. He stopped, for a moment, a long, unguarded moment that several people witnessed, and would later describe with varying degrees of satisfaction. Derek Calloway's face did something it was not accustomed to doing. It went quiet. The performance shut off. He stood there looking at a 1967 Ford Mustang finished in candy apple red that appeared to have been transported from some ideal version of 1967 where every decision had been made correctly, and he had no ready response for it. Marcus was standing near the front of the car, laptop bag over his shoulder, keys in his hand. He looked at Calloway with the same expression he'd worn 31 days ago, completely, terrifyingly calm. He did not say anything about the mockery. He did not reference the embarrassment comment or the demolition derby line. He did not perform triumph. He simply said, in the same even tone he used for everything, "Morning, Derek," and walked toward the elevator. Behind him, the Mustang sat in the morning light, looking like a declaration that required no translation. People were already taking photographs. By noon, 3 of those photographs were on social media. By evening, A local automotive account had shared one to their 200,000 followers with the caption, "Spotted downtown today." Story behind this one is something else. The comments filled up with people asking about the car, the story, the man. By the following weekend, a journalist from the city paper had reached out to Marcus through the company directory. By the end of the month, the story had become the kind of story cities sometimes adopt. About fathers and daughters, about patience and dignity, about the things we restore. Not to impress anyone, but because some things are worth the work. Calloway never made another comment about the car. Whether this represented reflection or merely the tactical silence of a man recalibrating was a question people argued about. Marcus did not argue about it. On Saturday mornings, he and Lily drove the Mustang to Desmond's shop, not for repairs now, but just to be there, the way you return to places where something important happened. Lily kept adding to her notebook. Marcus kept his father's steering wheel worn to exactly the right patina. The car still sounded enormous at idle. It still made people turn their heads at red lights. And every time it did, Marcus thought about Raymond Webb in a Beaumont, Texas driveway in 1987. Running his hand along the hood of a car he had saved 14 months to buy, understanding something that takes some men a lifetime to learn, and others never do, that the things built with love and patience outlast everything else. The mockery, the cruelty, the easy contempt of powerful men, all of it. They outlast all of it, the same way a fire-red 1967 Mustang, rebuilt by careful hands, outlasts the garage that tried to reduce it to a punchline on a Monday morning in May.